Did you guys know that ACT recently announced a couple of changes to the ACT exam? One of these changes makes the ACT more unique and separates it from the SAT, and the other change makes it more like the SAT. We're going to talk about both of these today. First, I'm going to get into the change that makes the ACT more unique, and that's that ACT is now offering something called a super score that you can send to colleges. Now, some of you are like, why does it need a super score? Wasn't super scoring around all along? And in a sense, yes. For a long time, many colleges and universities have said to students, hey, if you submit multiple test sitting scores from the ACT or the SAT, the college will pluck all of your best scores and then compile what's called a super score. But here's the catch. You had to send all of your ACT tests in order to send a super score. And that's what has changed. ACT now is allowing you to send their super score, and with that super score, they will also send a composite. So you have to pick one composite to send, and then they will also send your super score. So for example, a few years ago, I had a student score a 36 on a couple of sections and a 35 on the third section, and then bombed the fourth section. And then he retook the test, and that fourth section that he bombed, he got his score up to a 35, and he scored a 36 on that section that he got a 35 in. So he was able to then super score a 36, and that means that colleges would recalculate that, right? But now ACT is actually going to print that on a piece of paper that they send to colleges or on their digital transcript that they send to a college or university. So that's kind of a cool, exciting little feature that ACT has released to try to help students improve their scores in a way. But not all schools are going to accept super scores. You're going to have to check with the individual policies of colleges to see if that's something they accept. But that's kind of an exciting change. Now let's talk about the second change that ACT is introducing, and that's a change to the ACT reading section. Now, ACT has said when it comes to test content changes, it's committed to doing these changes over time in sort of a graduated fashion. Whereas the SAT every decade or so has popped out a brand new, completely revised test that's newer and better and more awesome, supposedly. ACT has said we're only going to change the test a little bit at a time, and we're going to introduce these changes, sort of over time. That means you don't have to go throw out your ACT prep book from this year or from the year before. You can hold on to your book, and there's not going to be a new book that reflects the newest changes to the reading section anyway, probably for a year. So that's kind of bad news, but I wouldn't freak out too much because the new changes are actually something that ACT has been testing for a while, but just in a different section. The change that they're proposing to roll out right now in the reading section was recently announced, and they said beginning in 2021, one passage in the reading section may be accompanied by a graph, figure, or table that contains information relevant to the reading task. In the passages containing these visual and quantitative elements, some of the questions will ask the student to integrate the information from the passage and graphic to determine the best answer. These items will contribute to the student's score in the integration of knowledge and ideas reporting category. And they call these VQI test questions. So what is the magical change? They're adding chart and graph questions to the reading. Yay! Now, the SAT has long had chart and graph questions in its reading section since its redesign that launched around 2016. But we have not seen these on the ACT, primarily, I've thought, because they have a whole science section for charts and graphs. So why do we need to put them in the reading section? I'm not really sure on the answer to that, but ACT has decided to follow in the footsteps of SAT and do so. Now, ACT has released a few sample questions. In this video, I'm going to go over how to approach those sample questions. I'm going to go through them step by step. I'm going to give you some general tips for approaching these kinds of questions, and I'm going to answer the great question that many of you who are prepping for this might have, which is how in the world do I prep for this if none of these questions are in my precious book? So we have this passage here. It says, which of the following conclusions regarding wheel characteristics is most strongly supported by the graphics? So my first tip, whenever you have quantitative information or graphs and charts essentially, and they ask you something that's strongly supported by the graphics, you have to really be careful to only look at the graphics. When it says supported by the graphics, do not think about the passage and the graphics. Just think about the graphics. The number one mistake that students make on questions like this, you guys sort of compile too much information. You compile your outside information, your passage information, and you assume too much. So don't overassume. Look at what's there. Nothing else is there. We have the smallest wheel always has the highest speed. So the smallest wheel is going to be over here and always has the highest speed. Well, this says lower speed and this says higher speed. So that is actually in conflict with what that says, okay? We have the smaller the wheel, the heavier the wheel. I don't see heaviness here. I'm going to look for heaviness here. So we have wheel type, and there's different wheel types, and there's different wheel diameters. it doesn't seem to be, because there's different wheel types, it doesn't seem to be that the weight is always heavier depending on the diameter. It seems to be the wheel type dictates the weight, because you see how these have the same diameter. So that doesn't make sense. It also kind of doesn't make sense because we have different wheel types. And if anybody's logical, you know that steel and clay are going to weigh different amounts. Okay, C, the largest wheel is always the heaviest. So we have this, and we see heaviest. This is about size continuum. And it says the largest wheel is always the heaviest. Well, this is 64, and this is 158. This is 58, that's smaller, and this is 167. So this is the wheel type here. All of these are wheel types, right? So this is a wheel type. And as you can see, there are some wheel types that are heavier, even if they're not as big in diameter. So that is misproven. Always is also a dangerous word. The larger the wheel, the higher its speed. Aha, we have that. See, the larger the wheel, the higher its speed. That aligns with something on the chart, and so we can put that. This is pretty similar to the science section. So if you guys struggle with these questions, my best advice is to work on the science. Granted, this is not necessarily scientific. It might be a little bit more mathematical. I guess it's engineering of some sort. But if you're missing these, digging into science work is probably one of the best things that you can do. But again, only look at the graphics. You don't want to think about outside information. And it's just punching through and understanding the logic of everything. What does this mean? Is that true or not? And you can kind of go through each one, use the evidence to say yes or no, verify it, and you're on your way. I will also just add one note here. The ACT is usually pretty logical, so you can use logical reasoning to kind of help you, but you should always verify it with the evidence that they give you. Based on the passage and the graphics, compared to a skateboard with precision wheel bearings, a skateboard made in the 1960s would likely have A. So I have precision wheel bearings right here, so I can look at that right here. I'm just going to circle that. But I don't know what a skateboard made in the 1960s would do, so I have to skim the passage for this. I like to call this an easy skim because it's numbers. Whenever you have numbers, capital letters, I call those easy skims because it's really easy to skim the passage for them. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to look for 1960s. 1960s, 1960s, there it is. All 1960s skateboards use steel and clay wheels. Awesome, bingo. Steel and clay were mentioned up here, I remember them. So I'm going to go back here to where steel and clay are. So you see how I have this information in 1960s and I can translate it to a piece that makes sense on the chart or graph. 1960s indicates steel or clay, so I've got a couple diameters and a couple wheel weights, and I'm going to compare those to precision bearings. So these are 50, 50, 75, and 86, 58, and 167. Let's read the answer choices. We'll get into this. They would have a higher potential rate of speed and faster acceleration. So this is all speed and acceleration. Do you see how I can look at this? Speed and acceleration really is down here, which comes down to the size. So I really only care about the size. Let's look here to translate steel and clay into size. Both of them are 50. Let's translate now precision bearings to size. That's 58. So I'm going to draw a little line about where 50 is and about where 58 is. And this is going to be my precision bearings, right? Compared to the precision bearings, the 1960s ones are what? So the 1960s ones are down here. So these are what compared to this? We have higher potential rate of speed and faster acceleration. Again, I want to look at this line and say, what is it compared to this? Is this higher acceleration? Yeah. So that part is correct, this faster acceleration. But the higher potential rate of speed? No, it's lower speed. So basically these are inverted. Low speed goes with high acceleration. So I know these have to be the opposites, first of all. So higher and faster aren't going to go together ever. And lower and slower aren't going to go together ever. Do you see? Because these are different and these are different. So I know that both those have to be wrong. Now some of you might have put B. And if you put B, you probably confuse the way the question's worded. My answer is actually going to be D, because my lower potential rate of speed corresponds with the 1960s. You can see a skateboard made in the 1960s would likely have A, lower potential rate of speed. They're going to be on the lower versus this guy over here, right? And a higher or faster acceleration rate, which is right here. So this is faster than that. This is lower than that. So D is correct. Again, if you got this wrong or if you put B, you probably confuse these. Now, these are really easy to invert in your mind if you're not super careful. I always kind of reread this would have A so I don't mix them up or I don't compare this to this versus this compared to this. I don't do it the opposite way. I don't say like, oh, compared to the skateboards made in the 1960s, the precision bearing ones are, right? You see how I could flip it around? That would be the opposite answer. That would be answer choice B. But that's not what it's asking. So make sure you keep everything straight. You've got to be super careful with your details. You can't get too confused. You've got to really track everything. And that's the way to really win on these questions. Okay, now let's look at number 3. Based on the passage in the graphics, does the information in the graphics support the claim that urethane wheels allowed skaters to turn both more nimbly and more safely? So the idea here is we're asking, does the graphics support this claim? Now this claim that's in direct quotes, whenever you have direct quotes, it's probably going to be directly from the passage. So one of the things that we can do is we can look to the passage to find this exact language. So I'm going to look for the word nimbly because it's kind of weird. It says here, Nasworthy visited surf shops. He adopted a new approach, giving free samples and staging the benefits, a comfortable ride, and traction that allows skaters to turn both more nimbly and more safely. So I found the exact wording, and this is the thing on the ACT. You kind of just have to find the exact wording, and there's nimbly and safely. So if you didn't find this, and the urethane wheels, again, are the story of Nasworthy, that's kind of what allows them to turn. None of this data, by the way, really tells me that they're going to turn more nimbly and safely. So here we're going to look at this. Because the graphics present data about the skateboard wheels that allow for lower speed and slower acceleration, no. Yes, because the graphics present data about the level of comfort experienced by skateboarders. It doesn't say level of comfort. I think it's actually going to be no, because they don't provide level of traction information. No, because neither graphic provides data about the skateboard wheels manufactured prior to the 1970s. That's not true. So though it's true that they say this information, this doesn't help support the claim that it allowed the skaters to turn more nimbly and more safely. This text, that it allowed them to turn more nimbly and safely, is because of the traction, right? The tenacious traction that I set up here. But traction isn't mentioned down here at all. Traction is not an issue of weight or size. It's this idea that it's resilient plastic and that it doesn't maybe translate all the little bumps, right? Because the little grains kind of get absorbed into the plastic and it sort of gives a little bit maybe. And that they're like stickier, right? That the urethane like sticks to the ground more. And that's that. So just some tips with graphics. Again, one of my biggest tips with graphics is if the graphic doesn't say it, the graphic doesn't say it. That's really what number 3 was getting at, is the graphic never said that. And that's a really common thing to keep in mind when you're looking at graphics. Graphics don't say everything. If it doesn't say it, don't infer it. Okay, so do not infer. That's my biggest tip here. Number 2, you're going to have to synthesize information. So when you do that, try to take it one step at a time. And my tip number 3 is always make sure that you really focus on the details so that you sort out the logic and you keep everything straight. And just be cautious, just be careful. Take things one at a time. Line up every word with every word. If the word is in the answer choice, line it up with the chart. Line it up, line it up. Be very methodical, be very patient and cautious, and that's going to get you right answers. So those are my tips. And now how do you get more practice is the next question. Well, there's several ways that you can work on this. Number 1, you can work on your science skills. If you're working on the science test, you're already working on chart and graph question skills, and those are going to help you. The other thing you can do is you can look through SATs, because SATs have this style of question. If you're not prepping for the SAT and you're just prepping for the ACT, you can still download some free SATs. We've got a bunch listed on our website, SupertutorTV.com/resources. You can download some old SATs, skim for the chart and graph questions in the reading section, and just do those questions and kind of get a feel for them, learn how to do them, and that can help you out as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel. Let us know, have you seen these questions on any of your ACTs? If so, tell us, because we want to know. Subscribe to our mailing list at SupertutorTV.com/subscribe. And you can find our online courses at SupertutorTV. If you want to get the most awesome score and you liked my teaching, there's over 100 hours of it, probably, on our website. So go check that out. You can also check out my math books at Amazon.com, the best ACT math books ever. Good luck on your ACT, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.